The night my husband signed me into Meadowbrook Care Facility, he told the nurse I was having a breakdown. He said I couldn't care for myself anymore. He said he was heartbroken. He was smiling when he thought I couldn't see him. I want you to hold that image for a second. A man you've built 11 years with, standing in a fluorescent-lit hallway, relief spreading across his face while you're being wheeled away in a borrowed wheelchair with a bruised collarbone and 3 cracked ribs. I want you to really sit with that, because I had nothing but time to sit with it, and what I found at the bottom of that feeling wasn't grief, it was clarity. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is not important. What is important is this. I was 31 years old, a licensed occupational therapist with my own small practice, a paid-off car, and a house in my name in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. I had worked for every single thing I owned. My husband, I'll call him Derek, had charm, good teeth, and a story that was always almost true. We met when I was 20. He was 26, confident, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and your mother's birthday. By the time I figured out those details were performance, not love, I had already added his name to my checking account and taken him on as a business partner in my practice. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was not seeing what he was doing slowly, incrementally, the way you don't notice a room getting darker until you can't read anymore. Derek didn't hit me. I want to be clear about that because I know what some of you are already picturing. What he did was quieter and harder to name. He questioned every financial decision I made. He volunteered to handle the billing for my practice to take the stress off me. He started answering emails from my clients. He told friends, casually, at dinner parties, that I'd been struggling lately. He planted seeds everywhere he went, and I was so busy running a practice and trying to hold a marriage together that I didn't see the garden he was growing. I found out what it looked like on a Tuesday in February. I had driven home from a long day. A client had canceled, I was tired, and I took a back road I didn't usually take because there was construction on the main one. There's a bridge on that road over a drainage creek, maybe a 15-foot drop. It was icy, the kind of ice you don't see until you're already on it. My car went through the guardrail. I don't remember the impact. I remember the cold. I remember a sound like the world folding in half. I remember a passing driver on the bridge above, a flashlight, a voice saying, "Stay awake, stay awake." I remember the ambulance, and I remember one of the paramedics cutting my sleeve and saying my blood pressure was dropping. What I do not remember is Derek being there, because he wasn't. According to the police report, my car had been in the creek for 40 minutes before anyone found me. Derek was home. His phone showed he'd received 3 missed calls from a number near the bridge, a bystander who'd seen the crash and was trying to reach my emergency contact. He didn't answer. He called back 2 hours later, after I was already in surgery. I didn't know any of this while I was unconscious. What I know now is that Derek arrived at the hospital the following morning with a folder. Inside that folder was a temporary guardianship petition he had already filed, citing my history of mental health struggles, a history that did not exist in any medical record, but apparently existed in statements he had given to 2 people, including my own sister, who I will get to, and a power of attorney document I had signed 3 years earlier during a routine estate planning session, thinking it was standard, thinking it was the responsible adult thing to do. It was. It was also the document Derek had been waiting to use. The hospital's patient advocate came to see me on my 3rd day there. She was a small woman named Carol, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a voice that did not rise or fall. She sat beside my bed and explained that my husband had filed for temporary guardianship. She explained that a hearing was scheduled. She explained that until the hearing, certain decisions about my care and finances would be subject to review. She said all of this the way you'd read an instruction manual. Then she looked at me over her glasses and said, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" I told her everything. I told her about the billing accounts. I told her about the emails. I told her about the dinner parties and the seeds. I told her about the way Derek would tell me I was overreacting and then, 10 minutes later, bring me tea and apologize so thoroughly that I believed him. I told her about the power of attorney and that I had signed it when I trusted him. Carol listened without writing anything down. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have a personal attorney?" "Not a shared one." "Yours." I didn't, but I knew someone who did. My college roommate, Priya, is a paralegal in Cincinnati. She is also the person Derek had systematically edged out of my life over 4 years, by being subtly rude to her at every gathering, until I stopped inviting her to avoid the tension. Priya had never stopped texting me, even when my responses got shorter and further apart. Even when I went quiet for months. I asked Carol if I could use her personal cell phone to make a call. She handed it to me without asking why. The conversation I had with Priya lasted 11 minutes. She cried for about 2 of them. Then she stopped crying and started making a list. Here is something the hospital did do right. When I told the patient advocate that I had reason to believe my husband might attempt to access or redirect funds from my accounts, She flagged my file internally and connected me with their financial liaison. There is a protocol not widely advertised, but it exists where a patient can request that their information not be shared with any family member or legal contact beyond basic condition updates. The official term varies by hospital, but the effect is the same. Derek could no longer walk up to any nurse's station and get information about my treatment, my discharge timeline, or my status. They told him I was stable. That was all they told him. What Derek didn't know was that Priya had arrived in Columbus by Thursday morning. What Derek didn't know was that my personal banking, the accounts that had only ever been in my name, the ones I had kept separate from the practice, had been flagged for suspicious third-party access attempts. What Derek didn't know was that my practice attorney, a woman named Miss Faulkner, who I'd worked with for 6 years, had been called and had immediately filed to have the POA suspended pending a competency review, something that is possible when the person who signed it is demonstrably competent and contesting it. What Derek also didn't know was that the police had quietly reopened the question of my accident. Because here is the thing about the ice on that bridge. It had been a cold week, yes, but the section of guardrail my car went through had been inspected 4 days earlier and logged as intact. And my car, a 5-year-old sedan I maintained meticulously, because I was that kind of person, had been in Derek's possession for a weekend, 2 weeks before the accident, while I was at a continuing education conference in Pittsburgh. I did not know any of this while it was being pieced together. Priya knew. Miss Faulkner knew. The detective assigned to my case, a quiet man who wore the same brown jacket every time I saw him, knew. I was focused on getting well enough to stand up without gripping the bed rail. On day 8, I was moved to a rehabilitation unit in the same hospital for my ribs and the collarbone. Derek had visited twice. Both times he had been warm, concerned, appropriately husbandly. He'd brought flowers. He'd held my hand. He'd told the nurses I was doing so well that he was so relieved. The second visit, he mentioned the house. Casually. He said he'd been talking to a real estate contact about options in case I needed longer-term care and we needed to free up resources. He said it like it was practical, like it was love. I said, "That's so thoughtful of you," and I smiled, and I felt my hands go completely still under the blanket. That evening I called Miss Faulkner and told her about the house comment. She was already ahead of me. She had already contacted a real estate attorney. The house was in my name, only Derek had never been added to the deed, a fact he seemed to have forgotten or assumed didn't matter given the POA. Miss Faulkner informed me, in the dry tone she used when she was being most precise, that a POA does not grant a spouse the right to sell the primary marital residence without court approval in Ohio, that doing so would be fraud, that she had already sent a letter to Derek's attorney because he had quietly retained one, which told us everything, informing them of this position. The letter apparently arrived on a Friday afternoon. Derek showed up at the hospital on Saturday morning. He did not bring flowers this time. He stood at the door of my rehabilitation room, and I watched him try to find the version of himself that usually worked on me, the concerned husband, the reasonable man. He said he felt like we'd gotten off track. He said he wanted to talk about our future. He said the real estate thing had just been an idea, nothing serious. He was surprised Miss Faulkner had reacted that way. I said, "Derek, I know about the guardianship petition." He paused for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, "I filed that because I was scared for you. That's all." I said, "I know about the power of attorney. I know you tried to access my personal accounts. I know about the weekend you had my car." The third silence was longer. He said, "You've been talking to Priya." He said her name the way you'd name a disease. I said, "I've been talking to a lot of people." He left. He didn't say goodbye. On the following Tuesday, I was discharged. Priya picked me up. We did not go to my house, because Derek was still there, and because I had been advised not to go there alone. We went to Priya's hotel room and ordered room service, and she sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Okay, here's where we are," and read me a list from her phone. The guardianship petition had been dismissed. The suspended POA meant Derek had no legal authority over any of my accounts or decisions. The practice accounts, the ones he'd had access to through our partnership agreement, had been frozen pending a full audit, which Miss Faulkner had requested and which I was entitled to demand as the primary license holder. The accident investigation was ongoing. The detective had found something in the undercarriage of my car. He would not tell me exactly what yet. He said he would call when he could tell me more. He called 3 days later. He called on a Thursday evening and he said, "We have enough." What they had was evidence that the brake line on my car had been tampered with. Not failed, tampered. The damage was inconsistent with wear or road debris. An automotive forensics specialist had reviewed it. The positioning of the cut was in a location that would have caused gradual loss of braking ability, rather than immediate failure, which is why I'd been driving for days without knowing, and why the failure happened on an icy bridge instead of a parking lot. Derek was taken in for questioning that Thursday evening. By Friday morning, he had been charged. I was not in the room when it happened. I was at Priya's hotel still, eating cereal I didn't taste, watching my phone. The detective texted me 2 words. He's in. I stared at those 2 words for a long time. I didn't cry. I had thought I would cry. What I felt was the absence of the thing I had been carrying for so long I'd stopped noticing the weight. In the weeks that followed, here's what happened with the pieces Derek had spent years moving around. The practice audit found unauthorized transfers, small amounts over 18 months. Each one small enough to look like a billing discrepancy if you weren't looking carefully, large enough to matter if you added them up. And we added them up. The total came to just under $40,000 moved from practice accounts into a personal account Derek had opened in his name only. That account, as it turned out, had been used to pay off a debt Derek owed to someone he had never mentioned to me, a debt from before we met. A debt that had been following him and that he had apparently decided my practice was the solution to. The divorce filing came through Miss Faulkner's office on a gray April morning. Derek's attorney pushed back on the asset division, which was creative of them, given the circumstances. Miss Faulkner's response to that pushback was 17 pages long, and I read every word of it with something approaching joy. There is a question I have been asked several times since all of this ended, and I want to answer it directly because I think it matters. People ask if I feel guilty. They ask if I feel sad. They ask if I miss him. What I feel is specific, and I'll try to name it accurately. I feel the way you feel after a fever finally breaks. You're weak. You're tired. You know the sickness was real, but the air in the room is just air again. It's not trying to take something from you. Here is what I want to say to anyone watching this who is adding someone's name to something and telling yourself it's just practical, just adult, just what you do when you trust someone. Trust is not a document. Trust is not a signature. Read what you're signing. Keep accounts that are yours. Keep a friend that is yours. Keep a copy of your own keys. And if something happens, if you end up somewhere frightening, and someone is standing in a hallway, and they look relieved, tell the patient advocate. Tell her everything. Carol went home that evening, and I don't know if she thinks about the conversation we had, but I think about it every time I drive over a bridge. I am still in Columbus. My practice is mine, fully and cleanly. Priya visited last month, and we made dinner and talked until 2 in the morning about nothing in particular. The house has been refinished in the living room. That corner I always meant to fix. I fixed it. My name is not important. But I am still here, and I want you to know that. If this story reached you somehow, if the algorithm sent you here today, I don't think that's an accident. I think you needed to hear that it's possible to walk out of something that was built to keep you in. Like this video, if it meant something. Stay safe out there. I'll be here next week.